gals, and welcome back to my channel. If you guys are new here, hi, my name is Hillary, and if you are a returning subscriber, then you must be a crazy Hilly, and welcome back. If you guys like this content, feel free to give a like or subscribe or leave a comment down below. It helps the channel out so much. I also have Patreon and merch down below. If you guys feel like checking any of that out, it is down there. Just check the links in the description. Also, I have other links for just equipment I use and things like that. So if you want to check that out and you're curious to what I use to film and other such things, that is also in the description. Now, other than all that, let's get right into the video. I just recently was on Netflix and I watched The Nightstalker. For those of you who do not know, it was a serial killer. His name was Richard Ramirez, and it inspired me to condense it and give you guys a video that's a little bit shorter but has all of the meat and potatoes that the entire thing goes on. And if not, you can feel free to go check it out. It's on Netflix. Nightstalker, real creepy. My house was no longer safe after that. I had to like double check all the locks, you know, real creepy stuff. Richard Ramirez was born in El Paso, Texas, February 29th, 1960. The youngest of 5 children, and his father was a former policeman who was quite abusive to his mother. So already starting out, his childhood was not ideal. As a 12-year-old, he was strongly influenced by his cousin, Miguel, and he was a former Vietnam veteran who would come home, like he came home, had a bunch of pictures of these atrocities that was committed during the war, like things, just not good photos, bad photos that you shouldn't be showing a 12-year-old, but he delighted in showing Richard all of the horrible things and death in these photos, and Richard learned from that. And then moving on from that, Richard was also witness to his cousin murdering his own wife. They had gotten into some sort of dispute. He then shot his own wife in front of Richard, and he only went to jail for a brief period of time because, you know, he was mentally unstable. So he actually got out of prison and continued to influence him for the rest of his life. After the murder of his cousin's wife, he obviously couldn't hang out with his cousin anymore, so he ended up moving in with his sister Ruth, who had a husband that was a compulsive peeping Tom who would look into people's windows at night and other such weirdness, and decided it was a good idea to bring Richard along. So on top of seeing his cousin murder his wife and all these war atrocity evil photos, he was now going with his brother-in-law to look at people in their windows at night. So not a good combination. I can kind of see why that would mess with a child's mind. And from there on, his fantasies just got worse and worse. So he started to mix, you know, hurting people and sexual pleasure all together, which is not a good combination. Like, that's bad. That's real bad. He dropped out of high school, and then at the age of 22, he moved to California, where he settled permanently. And this is where the majorities of his murders would take place, in California. So not good for Californians because Richard's come to town. Also, before I start mentioning what happened in California, as punishment a lot, his dad would take him into a cemetery at night and make him stay out there all night, which is where he learned a lot of his Satanist behavior, because back where he was going, there was a lot of rituals being done in that kind of area. And I'm pretty sure that's where he learned a lot of his weirdness, because he became obsessed with Satan. Richard's first murder was April 10th, 1984, where he murdered a young girl who was actually only 9 years old. They both were living in the same apartment complex, and he sexually assaulted her and ended up stabbing her. And I can tell you, I feel disgusted even just talking about it, but he murdered about 13 people, so there's kind of a lot of people that I have to go through. This being the first one, it's a bad time. This is just not good. I don't like... But this starting off, each one was different. He would change the way that he did things quite a bit, from stabbings, shootings, stranglings. It wasn't like a normal serial killer. Usually they find a method and they kind of stick with it, whereas he kind of just alternated to whatever was there, right? So let's move on, and hopefully I can get to the part where they caught him faster than this whole part. On June 28th, 1984, Jenny Vincow was murdered in her apartment. He had stabbed her, and a partial of his fingerprint was found on the window that he used to push open and get in. He was actually checking windows, checking doors, and a lot of it, like at the time, you know, this was the 80s, doors were unlocked. And if your door was unlocked, he would just waltz on into your house, right? So this is why I check my doors after. Glad he's gone, but just double checking. On March 17th, 1985, this is kind of where things turn, because he followed a girl who was, I believe she was getting off work. I'm not really sure. She was going home, and she parked her car in her parking garage, and it went up, and he came in. He slammed his hands down on the car to scare her, and when she turned around, he shot her with a .22. She put her hands up like this, and lucky she did, because she had a pair of keys in her hand, and the bullet deflected off the keys, and she kind of just laid there and played dead. But that's not where this finished, because he went upstairs and then murdered her roommate. The girl that was in the parking area actually ran and then realized, you know, my roommate, right? So she went back to go check on her roommate. And she thought he was going to come out of the garage, but he came out the front door, the exact door where she met him. And she said to him, like, you shot me once, you're really going to shoot me again? And he didn't shoot her. He ran away. He was he was known for divine interventions. So there was quite a few people that he didn't end up killing based on sheer luck. And then they ended up alive, and he would just run away. So he ditched, and that is where one of the best descriptions, or one of the first descriptions of him came from, was that girl who saw him running out of her house. Within an hour of that murder, he actually ran off and then pulled someone else over. Her name was Veronica Yu, and he shot her twice with a .22, and she was pronounced dead on the scene. And at this time, you know, they couldn't really connect these killings, but they noticed that they had 2 murders with a .22. It wasn't until they discovered footprints in later on murders. March 27th, 1985, Richard then entered a house that he had previously burglarized a year earlier, and found a husband and wife who were sleeping. The husband's name was Vincent, and I believe the wife's name is Zazara. I don't know if I pronounced that wrong. There's a lot of Z's. But what happened was, he immediately executed the husband with a .22, and the wife tried to fight back. She grabbed a shotgun and she pointed at Richard, and she went to shoot him, then realizing that her gun had a safety on, and he then executed her. Not a good scene for that one. He was very enraged that she tried to shoot at him, but you know, that could have been the ending of Richard Ramirez right there if that safety had been off, right? But this is where police kind of put together that there's a serial killer going around, because again, they were murdered with a .22. They also started finding a lot of footprints on the scenes of all these murders, and they were the same footprint. When police went to go check out this footprint, they found that it was from a certain type of shoe that not very many were manufactured. It was called an Avaya shoe, I believe. And when they traced it all back, there was only one black pair of Avaya shoes. They discovered that it was black from the previous people that had seen him or witnessed him. They thought it was a black tennis shoe. And they realized there was only one shoe that was actually sent to California, and it was purchased. Unfortunately, they could not find it, who purchased it or what store it went to. It was the 80s. I don't know. Had a hard time finding these things. But he kept leaving these footprints at basically every killing. They would be like, oh, there's the Avaya footprint, and they could tell that it was all the same person doing all these crimes. As well as all that, they were finding some fingerprints at the scenes, and they collected this. But again, in the 80s, back then, it wasn't like we had a computer and we could run it. It was literally like we could run them all and match them. It was literally like a filer fax. There was like a bunch of fingerprints in this little thing, and this guy named Glenn is like, oh, maybe, not so maybe, kind of maybe, like just putting them off to the side because you had to examine them all by hand instead of by computer. The 80s was a crazy time. This is probably why there were so many serial killers in the 80s, because they could just run around leaving clues and no one gonna catch them. On May 14th, 1985, Richard entered the home of Bill Doy and Lillian Doy and immediately took a .22 and shot Bill, the husband, in the head. That kind of seemed to be a little bit of a pattern that he was doing, was trying to execute the husband beforehand, and then took a pair of thumb cuffs. I did not even know what this was, but apparently they're like little handcuffs for your thumbs that hold your hands together. Don't know where you get those, but he had them. He used them to restrain Lillian and then sexually assaulted her and left. So Lillian survived, but her husband, who actually did survive the headshot immediately, was taken to hospital and then unfortunately passed away. There was actually also a couple people where he would sexually assault them and he would let them live, but he would try to cover their faces with pillows or be like, don't look at me, don't look at me. And then from there on, I know there was one lady specifically where he was telling her, no, don't look at me. And she was like, I swear to God, I won't look at you. And to his response was, don't swear on God, swear on Satan. Which, like, you're so extra, my guy. Like, swear on Satan. I'll be like, okay, I swear on Satan. Like, now in between all these murders, the police are trying to catch him. And at one point, there was a car that he had stolen from a scene, and he was actually pulled over. And when he was pulled over, the cop was kind of like interrogating him, and he knew he was going to get caught. So he drew a pentagram on the car, being the extra that he was, and then just ran away. The cops confiscated the car and they were going to go look for prints, but there was some sort of issue with where the car was and they were not able to get the prints out right away. So this car was left in the sun, baking after a murder, left in the sun. And when the cops finally got it, all the fingerprints and everything had been gone, like just burnt off the car because it was in the sun and all of it was compromised. But from searching that car, they found a dentist card with a dentist name on it. When they called him, they were 5 days late. 5 days from catching him because he had just gone in for his teeth. He had really awful stank breath. He had bad teeth. From there, the police went to the dentist and they got his records, and taking it to other specialists, they realized he has a rotten tooth. He's going to be back. So they decided from there on, let's set up some officers in here and they'll sit here every day until he comes. So they set the officers up and they're there for quite a while until they kind of decide, okay, we'll take the officers out because we're not even sure if he's going to come back and we've already been here for a while. So they decide to set up this panic button for the doctor to press. That day, the day that they decided to take the cops out of the dentist waiting area, the doctor calls the police after like a little bit and is like, where were you guys? And they're like, what do you mean? Because they had set up a panic button. And the doctor was sitting there pressing this panic button. But of course, in the 80s, nothing's attached, man. I don't even know if they had lights back then. Like, you had apparently computers the size of horses. And you're just sitting there and ringing your button is just not connected. And then he calls and he's like, yeah, I worked on his teeth. Where were you guys? And boom, Richard was gone. Now, I've decided I'm not going to go over every single murder because there was about 13 of them, and I can't describe all of it in the time that I'm going to be filming this, right? I'd like to keep it relatively short so you get the gist of it. But at some point, he moved from the area of Los Angeles to San Francisco, where he committed some other murders. Now, at this point, he had probably killed like 9 to 10 people in Los Angeles. Like, he had killed quite a bit of people, quite a clump. And the cops had yet to catch him, just running around, kind of mucking it all up. You know, it's hard. I get it, but he went to San Francisco and committed a couple murders there to where the police were like, all right, you're on our turf now, buddy. From there, the cops did some investigating after a couple murders were committed in San Francisco, and it was actually just random how the key to solving this murder happened. But while they were in San Francisco, the mayor decided to go release all the information about the shoes and all the stuff that he was wearing. So they never actually recovered the shoes that he was wearing when he committed all these murders, because he ditched them. And he was just kind of starting to kill people now without the main ticket item that was like, okay, it's our guy, right? So at some point during all this, a lady's son gave the police this bracelet, and they believed it was connected to the Nightstalker. So they collected this, and the lady said her boyfriend gave it to her, who was also a man of Mexican descent, and they went to go talk to him about this bracelet. When going to talk to him, he was not super like, oh, haha, like he didn't want to help, right? So the cops gave him the old one too, because you could do that back in the day, you know, just give him a good beating in the back of the car. And he said, okay, it was my buddy, Richard Ramirez. So from there, they had a name, Richard Ramirez. And they also had plenty of fingerprints from previous crimes that they had collected. So they finally searched up the name, and from that, they found a match. And they found the picture of the man who had been doing all of the murdering. From there, they took that picture and made it front page news. They decided to spread it all over everywhere as far as they could get. And actually, they had some sort of tip or figured out that he might be at a bus station. So they sat at the Greyhound bus station waiting for him to go to get on a bus. They were figuring that he was going to be outgoing and not a passenger, because at this time he was a passenger and he was actually coming off a bus. So Richard, when he came off the bus, kind of noticed that there were some people there, figuring they were cops, and decided, let's make a hasty exit. So he kind of goes out a side door instead of the front where all the police are, waiting to apprehend him. Ramirez was in Tucson, Arizona, visiting his brother at the time, so he actually had not seen his face all over the news or all over the papers. So when he left, he walked right into a liquor store to kind of like get away from the cops, and that is where he saw his face plastered all over local news. So he kind of looked up, like the people kind of recognized him, and he was like, uh-oh, and ran out and decided to get on a bus. From there, he sat on this bus, and the guy kind of sitting across from him realized, hey, yo, that's the guy, and got off the bus and called the police. From there, he was freaked out. He ended up getting off that bus and running, and he ran as far as he can go until he ended up into a neighborhood where he tried to steal a car, where everybody recognized him because, again, his face is all over everywhere. And they beat him with a metal pipe, and all those people subdued him until the cops came and finally apprehended the Nightstalker. Your terrorist behavior is over, sir. From there was a big trial that was going over all the stuff that happened, to which, you know, he was extra, and he's just in his, like, sitting in his chair, and he decides to get up and yell, "Hail Satan," and he draws a pentagram on his hand, and like, we get it, bro. You're into the devil. From there, the families of the people deceased were testifying against him, and this is where it got crazy, because, you know, you think there's one crazy person, but it turns out there's a ton of crazy people in the world, where there were women that were sending him provocative photos because, oh, he's famous, and, you know, me personally, I feel like they should have showed all the faces of all those women, because, I want you to know how dumb you're being when you are sending a guy that has murdered a lot of people provocative photos, like, to be what his girlfriend, he's getting arrested, you psycho. From there, he was sentenced to death and was supposed to be taken to death row. When the trial was finally over, they asked where he was going, and he said, "I'm going to Disneyland," which can't be good for Disneyland. I'm sure they were like, Mr. Disney, oh hell no, we got to rebrand. He ended up dying of cancer in 2013 in prison, which, like, you should have gotten way worse than that. And, you know, the one time I'm happy someone got cancer, right? And also, just before he kind of went to prison, he was talking to some detectives, and he claimed to a bunch of other murders that had happened that they haven't even pegged him for. So all the murders that we know of, he could have done quite a bit more before they were even on his track. Maybe even before he got those stupid pair of black shoes that he traipsed all over every crime scene in. He was probably hurting people way before they even knew, hey, we have a problem on our hands. But yeah, in the end, they did catch him. He got caught, passed away in prison, and that was the end of Richard Ramirez. That'll do it, guys. If you like this content, feel free to give me a like or subscribe or leave a comment down below. It helps my channel out so much. Don't forget I got a Patreon merch down below if you want to check that out. And also, if you're curious of any of the camera equipment I use, it is also down below. I hope to see you guys either in the next couple of days or in the next week. It kind of, we'll play it by ear, right? All right, guys. Bye.